So my name is Martin Turner. I run the Space on Quora mastering guitar and also mastering guitar gear. This is our first gear review. We've been provided a bass by glarrysmusic.com. I'm going to put the link on there. And this is really a very good bass for a beginner. Now, people often ask me what's a great instrument for a beginner, and there are two streams of thought on this. One group of people say buy the most expensive instrument you can possibly afford, and then you won't have to change up, you'll save money that way. But the other school of thought is to say no, buy the right instrument, because then you can learn what kind of player you are. If you went off and bought a resonator guitar, then you'd find that it was inappropriate if you wanted to play heavy metal solos. So with bass guitar especially, the characteristics of a good beginner's bass, or a bass that you could play in your first band, and a bass you're going to play as a top professional are quite different. Well, let's look at this one. As you can see, it's not a Warwick or a Gibson or a Fender or anything, it's Glarry's own brand. This is, the first thing you notice, it's a short scale bass. A short scale bass doesn't produce such a great sound as a full scale bass, and certainly does less sustain. It's also a very light bass, also gives you less sustain. Now that's actually really important for a beginner, because when you're a pro bass player, you want to control the sound absolutely. But when you're a beginner, too much sustain is just going to keep the sound going on and on and on and on, and you won't be able to control it. So knowing that you don't actually want a Warwick Streamer or an Alembic or something like that can help you to understand that this probably is a bass which is going to be more useful for you. Now, I say it's very light, it's made of burley wood, it's very nice colour, but one thing you notice is that the headstock is particularly light, and those machine heads, they're actually quite flimsy. In fact, if I'd say there was a weakness at all with this bass, it's going to be in those machine heads. They do feel quite flimsy, but that's a deliberate compromise, because heavy headstock is going to give you neck dive. And what I find with most beginner bass players is the instrument is way too heavy for them, their shoulders get pulled right over, they get bad habits, and after a while they say, you know what, I don't think bass guitar is for me. So I would always recommend to a beginner to start with a light bass. Really two things about it, or three things about a bass. It's got to hold its tuning. Now this bass has been sent with unstretched strings, and they're going to go out of tune in a little bit, but that's okay because I'll show you how to stretch them. The second thing is it's got to be good enough to play. There's no point having a bass which is impossible to play. If the action is too high, let's look at the action on here. So that's quite a, let's get on the camera there. It's quite a reasonable action for a bass. That's not at all going to be difficult to play, especially on a short scale bass. And the neck is very straight. You just sight down it and you can see that it is straight. It's provided with the key to make the adjustment on the headstock there, but that's not an adjustment you want to make yourself as a beginner. So the neck is in good condition, it's very playable. But the other thing is, what's the sound? Now you can say, well, this bass has only got one set of pickups, but actually this is a really nice pickup for this bass. My wife played this, she's a pro bass player, and she was quite surprised. Now, obviously if you put it through a cheap amp, it will sound cheap, but through her Ampeg, it sounded absolutely amazing. We're going to play it in a second, you are going to hear it. But there's no point having two sets of pickups if they both sound bad. One set of pickups in the right place, and this clearly is in the right place, is going to do very well. It's not going to have a huge variety of sound from selecting pickups, but again, as a beginner, that's not what you want. Now you've also got the electronics, and you've got a volume control here. Let me just show that up. You've got a volume control here, and you've got a tone control here. Now, the volume control works very well. You don't always get that on beginners' instruments. The tone control works well when the volume's turned up. When the volume's turned down, the tone control really operates as an extra volume control. Now, you have to live with that, but actually this is not a bad sound. It's not a bad tone control. Most of the early tone controls sounded either good in their full-on position or terrible in all other positions. But this one actually gives you a variety of sounds. Well, let's do a little bit of playing. Now, as I said before, I'm not a bass player. All the bass players instantly can see that, probably even by the way I'm holding it. But I'm a guitarist, so let's just do something very simple. So. Now, if you're hearing this acoustically, you can hear a little bit of rattle on that machine head, and it's probably to do with tightening up. Most guitars that have been in transit do need a bit of tightening up when they arrive. If you're not confident to do it, get someone to do it for you. But as you can hear, that sound is not at all bad. Let's just turn that volume control down, and let's turn it up again. So, yeah, and let's do the same thing with that tone control. So you're going to hear that tone control now, and actually you can really hear a decent bit of difference there, and that is going to be a big bonus for you in having a control that actually works. All the basses that I tried when I was starting out as a teenager, the tone controls did nothing. So what else about this? So you can see that this is playing all the way up the neck. It is adjustable, as all good basses are, so you can adjust the height of the strings individually, and you can adjust the length. And an Allen key is provided for that, which is quite a nice feature. But if you check it by doing the harmonic on the 12th fret, let's just have a look at that again. So harmonic on the 12th fret, I can do with a little bit of adjustment. But it's basically right, so you almost always have to do a bit of adjustment when a bass or a guitar arrives. For the rest, this is not a bad bass at all. You can see what I listened to when I was a kid. This is a bass which is going to be far better than the basses we started out with. Everyone's going to start somewhere, and the lightweight, the short scale length, and the really rather good tone straight out of the box is something, it's got really everything that you need as a beginner bass player. So my recommendation with this is, at this price point, this is a good bass to get. Now, I've got a couple of caveats. One of them is the supplied equipment. So it comes with what can only really be described as a dust jacket. If you're going to take this on the train, this will give no protection to your bass at all. So I would say you need to find a different case pretty early on. It also comes with a very thin cable. Again, I immediately chucked that out and used one of my kettle lead style cables. And it comes with a couple of Allen keys, which are right for the neck adjustment, but don't do it yourself, and for adjusting the string height and scale length. That's good. Also comes with a plectrum. I don't actually personally know anybody who plays bass with a plectrum, but there are people who do. And you can try that out. It's got enough with it for you to be able to plug it into an amplifier and start playing it straight away. But the bass is definitely good enough to gig with. The supplied equipment isn't. And I would say if you want to love this bass, then you want to get it a case pretty early on. With the bass itself, the only issue I would see is the flimsiness of these machine heads. Now, they're not enclosed types, and you can eventually replace these if you have to. Now, one more question. People often say to me, should I buy a cheap instrument and then upgrade it with pickups and whatever, go faster stripes and so on? The answer is absolutely, definitely no. You will halve the value of the instrument by putting other pickups on. It won't sound better because with this instrument, the sound comes from the pickups with the scale length and the weight of the body. And it's always going to be a light bass with not a huge amount of sustain. My wife's bass will be sustaining for the next 10 minutes on that note. But as a beginner, that's absolutely fine. So when you've got this bass and you've worked on your skills, and the bass player in our first band couldn't play bass at all, and we got him to learn just the notes, bum, 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 bum. And eventually he went on to become a pro bass player who was very well known. We did a reunion gig with him, and it was just astonishing what he could do. But as a beginner's bass is what you need. When you're no longer a beginner, give it to somebody else or sell it to somebody else. We've always passed on our bass guitars to other people because lots of people want to start, and it's actually quite hard to get going. And if you've got to buy a bass and an amplifier, and if you're using pedals, a pedal unit and books and get tuition, it all starts adding up. So help somebody out when this bass is no longer good enough for you. You need more sustain, you need to be able to move your fingers quicker, whatever. Give it to somebody else, let them begin on it. I was very impressed with this bass. I wasn't impressed with the accessories supplied with it, but really you're not buying a bass at this price point for those accessories. It comes in a box, it will have been shipped, it probably needs tightening up, and you probably need to check the scale length. You also need to stretch the strings, which I'll show you now. So when you put on new bass strings, or new guitar strings, you've got to pull them right away from the body. And if we now play that note, it's dropped by a semitone. Pull it again. And you've got to do that to all the strings, one by one, then leave it for a bit, then go back and do it again. When you get a new bass or a new guitar, you might think, this is a terrible bass, it keeps on getting out of tune. It's extremely unlikely that any guitar or bass will go out of tune because of a mechanical fault in the guitar. Unless you can see the neck bending up, which would be very scary, or things coming off the back, which again would be very scary. If it doesn't look obviously wrong, almost certainly it's the strings that need stretching. All new strings on all basses, all acoustic guitars, all electric guitars, all non-string guitars have to be stretched. And if you don't stretch them, they will keep going out of tune. If you want to know the difference between a pro bass player and a beginner bass player, don't look at the equipment. A pro could play on this and they could do all kinds of things that I would never even dream of. But they would make sure they stretch the strings first. You can put a beginner on my wife's Warwick bass, and if you've just put strings on and not stretched them, that beginner will not know what to do because those will keep going out of tune. So, in conclusion, this is a good bass for its price point. So don't imagine that this is going to knock Fender out of the market. That's not going to happen. It's not maybe the bass you're going to be playing 10 years later, although you might keep it in your studio and get it out occasionally and play with it. It does play well. It does sound good. The electronics, apart from that weakness with the tone becoming a volume when the volume is turned down, the electronics do work well. And it's got everything you need for a beginner's bass. Well, there you are. That's our first review. Put some more details on. Thank you for watching.